Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Yae Miko, another character in our character archive. We've made it through our other characters. Now we're making it through our Inazuman lineup, through the character archive, talking about Yae Miko. So when we get into what she is as a character, if you can kind of see my normal setup, I usually have a DPS, my support or my sub-DPS characters, and then my healer or shielder or whatever at the end. Usually because of that though, you can see here with my Yae Miko, she fits into the sub-DPS role. Usually you have characters that are main DPS characters who like to be on field, characters like Raiden, Arlecchino, Neuvillette, whatever. They like to be on field while they do their damage, and while Yae Miko can do that, she has a lot of off-field capabilities, but she's not really a support character like someone like Kazuha who likes to be off-field, but actually supports the other characters. Yae Miko's a little bit more selfish, where she just wants personal damage. Someone like Chiori or whatever, who's coming up on the next banner pretty soon, hopefully you're going to see a very similar idea. So that's also kind of the idea usually when running Yae Miko. So going into her kit and her talent info and kind of looking at leveling priority, you can already see here how you really only want to focus on the skill and the burst. Now, I know a lot of people are going to get mad that I don't have the normal attack leveled at all. The reason why is because I never use her on field. Now, I know it's cheap and I know it's not really that expensive, and if you have extra materials to go throw into it, you go ahead and can. The major idea you should be grasping from this, though, at the end of the day, is her skill and her burst are the things that actually matter in terms of leveling priority. Going for the skill first and then the burst. Reason why is because the skill is what's going to allow you to actually do damage from off field, and the burst is going to have you on field and using those skills that are on field or kind of already on the field when you use your skills. Using your burst is going to trigger a big damage hit as well as more damage hits because those skills are on field. Also allows you to reset the cooldown on those skills, allowing you to use them again. So with both of these, you kind of want a bigger damage hit. Her burst is when you use it when you have it, not necessarily necessary, but when you do have it, you do want to use it. So, and it is a pretty good amount of damage, so you actually want to focus and level into it, considering you're not really worrying about the normal attack talent at all. Now looking at the skill, let's go ahead and see how when you use the skill, you're going to leave a Seisho Sakura behind. And these have the following priorities. Periodically will strike a nearby opponent with lightning, dealing electro damage. And then also when there are other Seisho Sakuras nearby, so when there are multiple on the field, their level will increase, boosting the damage dealt by these lightning strikes. So the more of them that you have on field, the higher the level of all of them will increase. So the skill has 3 charges. So if you see here, they'll also connect to each other. If you can kind of see the kind of light purple between them, but they've leveled up actually between them, and you can see the different charges on the levels of them as they are kind of used. But if you see whenever one of them is going to disappear, you see how it goes down to only one of these little kind of nothing around it. But then as soon as you go to 2, it's going to have the ring on top of it, and then when you do another one, you can see it has 2 rings on top of it to show you that it's now level 3. So if you only one of them's on field, which means level 1, and then 2 of them on field is going to have the extra ring, and then there's no rings around them, means that it's just a level 1 Seisho Sakura that's on field. So looking at that though, kind of the idea, that's kind of how you're going to want to be. You don't have to actually focus on looking at that. It's just going to happen, and it's always going to happen. Make sure they are pretty close to each other so that they can actually connect, because that's what's going to make sure that they are actually making sure their level increasing as well. Now, the initial level of each Seisho Sakura is level 1, and the initial highest level each Sakura can reach is 3. So although it can get to level 4, you see in the skill attributes, the initial level it can hit is 3 because there's only 3 on field. You're not really going to have a problem with that most of the time in battle, but keep that in mind as you are using them for exploration or whatnot. It's really nice though because the cooldown on these is 4 seconds long, which means they're pretty easy to create. Now that does mean though when you are overall, you do have an extremely long duration with each of these, but as you can see I have a 4-second cooldown, and if I keep going then I'm just waiting until the next one. But as you can see I can create another one, but by the time I create another one, one of the others disappears. And so it's always creating this kind of ring with each other and always making sure that everything's kind of put together as well. Now let's go ahead and talk about her burst, another extremely useful part of her kit. When using this, you're basically going to have a huge lightning strike that's going to happen, that's going to do AoE electro damage. And then when she uses this burst and there are those Seisho Sakuras nearby using the skill, it will destroy them and actually turn them into Tenko Thunderbolts, which will do huge AoE damage that will descend from the skies. And that'll basically mean each of those hits, or each of the Seisho Sakuras, if I used my ult right now, you'd see them change and actually do multiple hits. So you saw 3 hits happen, and I had 3 Seisho Sakuras out, which means you had 3 Tenko Thunderbolts hit. But you could see that all 3 of these Seisho Sakuras got immediately taken out. But you also saw when I used that ultimate, I immediately got my cooldown for all my skills back again. So as soon as you use your ultimate, or burst, you can go right back into using these. So what's nice about that is using all 3, then using a burst, and then using 3 again. It's to make sure you still have that off-field damage applied for each rotation that you have with Yae Miko. So going a little bit further into her character kit, let's go ahead and look at the actual passive talents. The first passive talent states that when casting the burst, each Seisho Sakura destroyed resets the cooldown for 1 charge of the skills that you're using. And as you could see, those immediately basically almost reset my cooldown for all of them. And that's because it was basically bringing each of them down. Because I destroyed all 3 of them while I did my ultimate, it brought the others down, all 3 of them, for my skill cooldown, brought them all down to 1 second. So it's borderline immediate to getting those skills back. So if you use 3 of your skills and then immediately use your burst, the likelihood is that you're going to have already it's going to take a second or 2 for using the other skills out on field. So if I used my skill right now just to make 3 of them, and then I used my ultimate, that took about a second to do. If I used my ultimate, my burst right there, I would have a 4-second cooldown for each of these, but then it's going to create 3 seconds less because I did the burst and it destroyed all 3 of them. It's going to make actually your cooldowns go almost instantly away, which therefore makes them immediately pop back up. So an extremely good passive talent to have, which is why you can, with the skills and the burst, actually make sure you're getting those skills out after you use the burst. It's not an immediate usefulness to have and use the burst and get rid of your off-field damage. Also, the second passive talent states that every point of elemental mastery Yae Miko possesses will increase the Seisho Sakura damage by 0.15%. Now, back in Inazuma, once again, some of the other characters, we didn't really understand why they had specifically, for instance, Kuki's the same way. There's some EM tied to their kit, and back then, there was no reason to do really any reaction with Electro, because it was just swirl, it was, crystallize, or overload, which you don't really care about the damage. Electrocharge, once again, you don't care about the damage. Superconduct, you don't care about the initial damage again. So having high elemental mastery in these characters for Electro really didn't make sense. So also with their second passive talent with Yae Miko increasing with elemental mastery didn't make sense. But as soon as you start to talk about spread, aggravate teams or whatever, where Yae Miko can be helpful and either do the major damage in the team as an aggravate DPS or sub-DPS, or she can create, for characters like Alhaitham or whatnot, to create spread for them. She's actually also okay to have a good amount of elemental mastery as well. So going into elemental mastery is nice. I wouldn't necessarily say it's something that you want to go so heavily into though, but it is nice and it's not necessarily a useless stat, especially when you're talking about those teams that work off spread and aggravate. So looking a little bit further past talent, let's go ahead and talk about different weapons. Now, obviously, her personal weapon is going to be the best, but like normal, we don't talk about the best weapons for the character or the personal weapons for the character. We talk about the best weapons, but we don't talk about the personal weapons for the character because obviously her personal weapon, Kagura's Verity, is going to be number 1 no matter what. With her ascending into crit rate, it is nice to have a crit damage weapon, so it does balance out that ratio as well as the ability is extremely good as well with this weapon. Now, when we're talking about an off-field kind of DPS or sub-DPS in general, another weapon that could be useful is Skyward Atlas, and Skyward Atlas is an attack percent main stat weapon. It increases elemental damage bonus by 12%. Also, normal attacks have the idea to hit like an extra damage hit, which is nice, but it's the main stat of attack percent that really draws a lot of people into this weapon. Another weapon that's great for her could be another 5-star standard weapon, which is Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds. Because she already ascends into crit rate and this weapon going to crit rate, it allows you to heavily focus into crit damage with a little bit of crit rate on her other pieces and her artifacts. So that's kind of the major idea here. You don't really care about the increased movement speed by 10%, but when you're in battle, gain an 8% elemental damage bonus for every 4 seconds, and this lasts until the character falls or leaves combat. Now, if you think about it here, actually, when you're in combat, this is only talking about in battle. It doesn't talk about on field or off field. So getting these stacks actually can happen for Yae Miko, and it is actually still a good weapon to go for. Besides that, I wouldn't really use too many other weapons. If you accidentally have 1,000 floating dreams and you really want to go to make her an aggravate DPS, or you really want to make sure that she's doing a lot of extra damage just because of spread teams or aggravate teams or whatnot, sure, you can go ahead and use 1,000 floating dreams if you have something extra. But I would say that it's honestly just not an extremely good weapon to really go for her. I would rather just use something like the 4-star Solar Pearl. Now, this is Battle Pass locked, so if you have the Battle Pass, this is good for her, but it also does kind of mess with you a little bit. Now, the thing here, obviously, once again, the main static crit rate is going to be very helpful. The normal attack hits increase elemental skill and elemental burst damage by 20% for 6 seconds. So doing a normal attack with this weapon in combat before you go ahead and use your skills and your burst and whatnot is going to be helpful. And then when you use your skills and burst, it's going to increase normal attack damage, which you don't really care about unless, of course, you are an on-field, once again, aggravate DPS with her. If you are going for an on-field aggravate DPS type build, I do still think it's between 1,000 Floating Dreams and Solar Pearl. So if you're going for aggravate, it can still be between these two, especially because of the extra help in normal attack damage, and she'll be on field a lot more often because of it. Now, another weapon that you can get besides Solar Pearl that does work extremely well is Old Sworn Eye. Now, I believe this weapon actually is event locked, so everybody who kind of can get this, I don't think can get it anymore, but Old Sworn Eye is useful and helpful. It increases energy recharge by 24% for 10 seconds after using an elemental skill at R1. At R5, it's increasing it by 48%. Now, looking at her as a character, that energy cost she has in her burst is 90. So having that higher of an energy cost is going to be way more helpful, obviously, when you have a higher energy recharge, so that you can obviously get there quicker, especially if you're using it in teams with a character like Raiden. The energy recharge really doesn't matter that much because Raiden's feeding back so much energy back to the other characters, so it is extremely helpful for that. But I would just keep in mind that when you are kind of worrying about what to do with her as a character, which we'll get into substats in a minute. But the main stat of attack percent is nice, and the weapon itself is pretty good for Yae Miko. Another weapon, though, that I do want to say that can still work is going to be the Wit Sith. It's crit damage main stat, like her weapon. It's not as much, obviously, but the good thing about this specific weapon is that it does have a high, it's basically just a stat stick, and all of the abilities are going to be extremely helpful. Other characters that use Wit Sith, sometimes the Elemental Mastery is a waste for characters like Wanderer or whatnot, or sometimes the attack is kind of useless and the Elemental Mastery is kind of useless for a character like Neuvillette, because you don't really want to care too much about a high EM or a high attack because he does damage based off HP, and he almost does too much hydro damage to the point where it's hard to apply pyro and make him vaporize or whatever. So the only thing he really would care about is the 96 or the elemental damage bonus. So it's a chance to get one of these three, but with Yae Miko and that passive talent helping out even more, the Wit Sith actually has a good reason to be on her because she can use all three of these extremely well. I know there are some other weapons like Hakshin Ring, or some people are going to talk about more EM, specific weapons like Mappa Mare. If you're having so much issue with kind of extra energy recharge, you could go for something like Battle of the Boundless Blue or Fab Codex or something that has energy, but I wouldn't really say that's a great idea. Also, technically, if you're running on field and you have Dodoko Tails, you can use it as well. But once again, I wouldn't really say that it's necessarily something that I think is extremely great. Also, once again, not really a fan of using Ring of Yaksha on her either because of the main stat. But I do want to talk about the Natlan specific weapons just because they are here and new. Now, going beyond looking at weapons, let's go ahead and talk about artifacts. In my personal opinion, I love the 4-piece Golden Troop set. I've done the personal testing and seeing the damage difference between what I had before, which was a 4-piece of Gladiator's Finale, or a 2-piece of Gladiator's Finale, and a 2-piece of another attack percent set somewhere around here. I had another, I think it was Shimenawa's. So I had a 2-piece of Shimenawa's and a 2-piece of Gladiator's Finale, which is great because the extra attack that she can get is 36% attack just from the 2 pieces that you can get from both of these sets, 18% attack here and 18% attack here. If you can do that and you have really good stats, then that's really not a bad way to go with Yae Miko. But because I had grinded out Golden Troop and Mère Chaussée for so long, doing for so many different characters that came out in Fontaine, getting a really good set for Yae Miko through Golden Troop was actually pretty easy because the other characters didn't really like attack percent as much as kind of some other characters. And so, for instance, a character like Wriothesley also got built pretty well because Neuvillette didn't like the attack percent pieces. So getting something that was really good on crit or whatnot for him was a little bit easier by doing so for him as a character. And so in suit, when looking at other characters that cared a lot about HP, Yae Miko did pretty well by getting the other crit pieces that actually focused into attack. So if you actually have the ability to run a lot of help through Golden Troop because you've run so much of the domain for Farina or something like that, or for your Neuvillette, you might actually have some pretty good pieces. I would definitely say that this 4-piece is better than the 2-piece, but it really heavily does depend on your stats. Now, the 2-piece of this increases elemental skill damage by 20%, and it increases elemental skill damage by 25%, an additional amount in the 4-piece, and then above that, when not on the field, which Yae Miko is usually not, the elemental skill damage will be further increased by 25%. So that's just increasing it by 50% from the 4-piece when you're not on field, which is 50% plus the initial 20% in the 2-piece. That's 70% more damage from your skills. So if you're hitting now, and I'm not really thinking that most people are going to be hitting this, but if you're hitting 100k on those hits, you're actually hitting 170k because of the extra elemental skill damage that you're getting here. Now, if you're hitting 10k, you're going to hit 17k. You can see how you're almost doubling the amount of damage just by using this 4-piece here from the Golden Troop set. Whereas the 36% attack is extremely nice, but it's not really that goated comparatively. If you have better stats on the 2-piece, go with that. But if you have pretty even pieces with the 4-piece Golden Troop, I would definitely say to start grinding for that if you really want to. But I know, and I want to bring this up, if you are looking at the 4-piece Golden Troop, yes, it can work, and a lot of people are going to be using Yae Miko as an off-fielder for, once again, those aggravate or spread teams, or she can be an on-fielder as well, similarly for those teams. And as we've talked about those other weapons and leveling priority, once again, that leveling priority and those talents, if she's an on-fielder, those normal attacks are actually going to want to be leveled because she's going to be on field for so much and be doing those. The 4-piece of Gilded Dream states that the 2-piece set increases elemental mastery by 80 and within 8 seconds, and the 4-piece of triggering an elemental reaction, the character equipping this will obtain buffs based on the elemental type of the other party members. So the attack is then increased by 14% for each party member whose elemental type is the same as the equipping character. So other Electro characters will give Yae Miko 14% more attack, but specifically in those spread or whatever teams, you're usually having a double Dendro on the team and maybe a double Electro. So you have one other character that's Electro giving you 14% attack, but 50 elemental mastery for other characters without Electro, which means you're getting 100 EM. So usually with those on-field or off-field teams, usually where you're doing with spread or aggravate, you're getting 100 EM and 14% attack because of it. So this 4-piece set is definitely way better if you're using Yae Miko so much in the specific other teams that are focused on Dendro type reactions. But if you're a little bit kind of used to using Yae Miko everywhere like I am, she gets time on the Raiden and Yae Miko team. She gets time here and there on some other teams. And yes, she does get time with Alhaitham as well in a spread team and kind of just using as the applier. She even gets time in an Arlecchino team as well in Overload, as she's the only Electro character there because she creates enough Electro for me. And because of that, I keep her on the 4-piece Golden Troop. But if I only really ever used her actually in the specifically the spread team, I would just go with the 4-piece Gilded because there'd be no reason to really kind of do anything else, and it makes more sense to get more EM, and it makes more sense to kind of get the 4-piece that you're actually getting from it. Now, when looking at the main stats, this is going to change once again depending on what you kind of have. As you can see, the Elemental Mastery is secondary to attack percent. So even though most people are running the 4-piece of Gilded Dreams, still most people still care more about the attack percent and care about the Elemental Mastery afterwards. So they'll make sure that they focus EM on, substats and whatnot here, and they'll worry about the EM later, not really right now in the main stats. So even if you are kind of going on the EM route or going on the spread only or whatever, aggravate specific only teams, I would still say to just still go for the attack percent. She scales way better off of it. So I would just say you can get it from the 4-piece. If you're only going that route, once again, you're going on a 4-piece Gilded. You're already going to get 100 EM, 180 actually from the entire 4-piece. So it makes more sense to just go for attack percent on the main stat. Now, the Goblet, it's almost always going to be electro damage bonus. Yes, if you're really low on attack percent because you want an EM circlet here, I would probably go for an attack percent Goblet here. But once again, you can see most of the community even still is going for an electro damage bonus Goblet. Now, she ascends into crit rate. Her weapon is crit damage, but I still think that crit rate or crit damage can definitely still be balancedly used. As you can see here, it's almost pretty even actually between using crit damage and crit rate. It really just depends on how much you actually want on your crit rate for your Yae Miko. And if you're lacking a lot on your pieces, that's definitely going to depend on having a more balanced ratio because of what you have. So overall, once again, try to have, actually, my personal opinion, a little bit of a higher crit rate, probably a 60 or above crit rate with Yae Miko. I like to have something extremely high, having this nice 1-for-2. But at the same time, it does kind of depend on actually what you have in front of you and what you can kind of offer for you. Now, you'll notice my attack is lower because I'm not running the 2-piece of attack anymore. And so therefore I suffered a little bit, but I'm getting so much more out of it because of the elemental skill damage increase from this 4-piece of Golden Troop. Now let's go ahead and talk about Constellations. And looking at the C1, it states that each time the burst activates a Tenko Thunderbolt, Yae Miko will restore 8 elemental energy for herself. And if you obviously create 3 of those and then you destroy all 3 and you get 8 for each, 8 times 3 is 24. Remember, she has a lot of very high energy cost. So getting 24 energy out of the 90 is going to be very, very nice, especially if you're like me and you're a little bit lower on the ER route of the character. Also, it's extremely nice because if you're not running her with another Electro character for the resonance of creating more particles, or if you're near, you're not using someone like Raiden who's feeding a lot of energy back to her, honestly, I would just say that it's a lot better to just actually have this C1. It makes things a little bit smoother for her, definitely over time. Also, if you think about it, using the burst actually gives her more energy, which can then allow her to use her burst more often, which is allowing her to give herself more. It's just a cycle over and over, using your burst more often needs more energy, which you can get from using your burst. So once again, it's a vicious cycle that's actually pretty good for you in the long run. Now looking at the C2, the Seisho Sakura start at level 2 when created, and their max level is now increased to 4. So when we were talking in the skill attributes, when we kind of saw her skills, you saw that it can go to level 4, but in the base kit at C0 and C1, you can only get to level 3. But because when they are created, they're initially level 1, but now when they are starting out, they are starting at level 2. If you have 2 of them on field and you have the C2, it's now level 3. If you have 3 of them on field at C2, you now have them all at level 4. Also, their attack range is increased by 60%, which is going to be very nice, especially for the Abyss or whatnot, where a lot of things are moving around and sometimes getting out of the way, especially when things are flying and kind of are not mobile or are not stable. They're way more mobile, so very nice C2 actually, all things compared, just because of how well it does allow for higher damage increase as well as attack range in the AoE sense. Looking at the C3, it states that it increases the level of the skill by 3, and the C5 increases the level of the burst by 3. Looking at the C4, when Seisho Sakura lightning hits opponents, the electro damage bonus of all nearby party members is increased by 20% for 5 seconds. Now that we're starting to get way later into her kit, through Constellations, Yae Miko can actually be helpful to other characters. So you actually see that as well with a DPS character like Raiden, where her later Constellations actually start helping out other characters. And that's kind of the whole point. You're decreasing elemental burst cooldown, or you're increasing their attack. Whereas with Yae Miko, getting into the late Constellations is when you start to help other characters as well. So it's the same thing kind of idea. The first few Constellations are purposefully helping herself, and then as soon as you get to the C4, that's where she starts to give a 20% electro damage bonus to other characters, which once again, those Seisho Sakuras are on field for 14 seconds. And they're hitting it every so often, which means you're basically always having a 20% electro damage bonus, which means with her C4 and higher Constellations, she's going to do way better when she's paired with other electro characters. Now looking at the C6, the Seisho Sakura's attacks will ignore 60% of the opponent's defense. Now this is also once again very similar actually to another character, once again Raiden, who her C2, she does something very similar, but the Seisho Sakuras are the major way once again you're doing most of your damage. So the C6, although it is only 2 lines in one sentence, it is an extremely strong buff to the actual Seisho Sakura damage. Once again, when you're getting rid of or putting a resistance or something on an enemy, you're practically doubling your damage. So whereas if you got a 40% damage buff or a 60% damage buff, it's actually less than ignoring 60% of the opponent's defense, because you're practically doubling the amount of 60% when you're talking about decreasing their defense. So instead of 60% more damage, you're actually doing 120% more damage than what you normally would do. So keep that in mind actually when you're kind of talking about that. So if you were doing 10k, you're actually doing 22,000 because of the C6. Now that's going to be a lot higher just because of her damage numbers when she's at C0 for me. So obviously with these type of getting into the C6 and helping a lot more with her own personal damage, this is going to be a lot better for her, obviously, because you're just shredding defense. And once again, Raiden has basically the exact same thing when she's using her burst and when she's in the Muso Ishin state. So overall, I do think that Yae Miko has some pretty good constellations. I do think, though, that if you really have an energy issue, the C1 can help and fix certain things in your kit. For instance, myself, I've thought about getting the C1 just because it will help my lower energy recharge on the character. But I really honestly don't care to use her burst so often, and so I don't really feel like it's a need to really go after the constellations. I might in the future, but I don't think that it's really necessary. I do think she's an extremely good character still at C0. Now looking at Yae Miko specific teams. Looking at the different teams, obviously way back when kind of these characters first released, you're seeing in the lineup here, Raiden, Shogun, Yae Miko, and Kazuha and Bennett were practically the best team that you could have in the game. Raiden's extremely high amount of damage with her quick swap kind of idea with a character like Yae Miko that does like to take the field every once in a while did help, as well as Kazuha wanting to help when he's swirling for Raiden or Yae Miko, he's helping the other as well by increasing their damage. So Bennett obviously is just a healer here, but he's making sure to keep everyone alive and also increasing both characters' attack, which they both scale off of. So a very good team, very synergistic, and the double electro means that it's getting everybody's burst back, and these two characters here have a 90 energy cost, both Raiden and Yae Miko. But they work so extremely well together because Raiden is feeding back everybody's energy back to each other. And by Yae Miko being here, she's actually giving the double electro resonance, which superconduct, overload, electrocharge, quicken and aggravate, or hyperbloom, any type of reaction that's fueled by electro besides swirl will actually have a 100% chance of creating an electro elemental particle. That has a cooldown of 5 seconds, but it's extremely nice to know because it's creating more particles, which is allowing for more energy given back to the characters. So once again, you're getting Raiden's burst back a lot easier, which also means that you're getting a lot more particles and more energy back to other characters, and also creating those reactions is good as well. Now, Yae Miko as well, she's hitting from off field, which means that she's also creating particles. So honestly, all things considered, a very strong team together, and helping each other out is probably the best part of this build. Beyond this specific team though, over time, obviously, you could quote unquote, oh, it got, power crept here and there, blah, blah, blah. Still in a very strong team, and I can run this in the Abyss easily. Even before I had my C3 R1 Raiden, this was still a very strong team that I ran in the Abyss and had no issues with. Now, this is a very stacked team. You have one of the better DPSs in the game, top 10 easy, possibly top 5, and you've got a character like Kazuha who is one of the best supports in the game as well. So it's a very stacked, very difficult team to get, but it does do extreme wonders as well. Another team that you can run with her is a team that is focused on spread, like I talked about before. This is probably going to be a team you're very used to seeing, probably maybe switching out Fischl for a character like Nahida, which once again, Yae Miko can be the only electro player in the team. That is fine, and she does extremely good at it. Fischl is basically the 4-star version of Yae Miko, or Yae Miko is the 5-star version of Fischl. I like her gameplay a little bit more, but I do know that people are not too big of a fan of Yae Miko's playstyle, but I actually extremely enjoy it more than I do with Fischl, sadly, so I know all the Fischl people are going to hate me on that, but that's okay, because honestly, Yae Miko's damage does extremely well, and so does Fischl. The thing here that Yae Miko can do is that the A4 passive that Fischl has that makes her extremely good can't be triggered off in this team normally, so keep that in mind when you're kind of trying to be like, well, I have Fischl and I use, Fischl in my spread teams all the time and aggravate and whatnot. Fischl can't proc it she can't proc her A4 passive from my knowledge, as a lot of people have talked about in the past. So Yae Miko does have an upper leg here. So if you are trying to care about a specific team, you really like Alhaitham and you want to find one of his best supports, Yae Miko is probably going to be one of those, as well as a character like Baiju and Nahida. But once again, you're seeing very high how there's a lot of Dendro-specific or very high damage dealers here, or very high 5-star potential. So if we easily going to a healer that's a 4-star and we switch to a standard character, this can also work as well. Yae Miko and Tighnari, they're both actually kind of quick swappy. Tighnari's pretty quick swappy, very similar to Raiden, so which is why he works pretty well with a character like Yae Miko. And here's your 4-star healer and another 4-star damage character. These three are just kind of quick swapping as much as possible, whereas Yao Yao is just there for the heals. And you also do want to quick swap with her. She's not as flexible and as kind of off touch as Baiju, which is a little annoying sometimes, but it does allow for pretty good heals from her as a character. Now, another team I do want to talk about is the Overload team that I was talking about earlier. You can use an Electro DPS like Cloron. You can use a Pyro DPS like I'm using, like Arlecchino. You can use Raiden also as the DPS in this specific team. But the biggest idea here is to have one Electro character at the least and one Pyro character. So you need to have only Pyro and Electro in the team, and making sure that the only way this works is by helping out Chevreuse. So by doing with Chevreuse, kind of her biggest help here is that she has a thing where she's decreasing Pyro and Electro resistance based on the overloaded reaction to the character that she's helping right here. So any of the opponents that they hit are then going to have their Pyro and Electro resistance decrease, which means more damage for those characters. Also, as long as, once again, Pyro and Electro characters are in the party, you gain 1% attack for the other characters in the party that are Pyro and Electro for every 1000 max HP that Chevreuse has for 30 seconds. Once again, while Chevreuse is going so heavy, she can once again decrease resistance for Pyro and Electro and also increase attack, which these characters in this team very, very much like. So by looking at that, you can easily once again switch this to another character like Raiden Shogun, and you can have a little bit of damage from both these characters and also have the healers and the supportive aspect from Chevreuse to make it work. So having these kinds of teams does allow for a little bit more flexibility, and it is extremely fun. But the crux of the team actually isn't Yae Miko. Yae Miko is kind of an extra placeholder to do some extra damage. Chevreuse is the real reason this team works. Now, technically, you could also make this kind of only specific to these few characters. For instance, Yae Miko, if you're like, I really just like Yae Miko, honestly, that can still work. You can still have most characters that are just Yae Miko as the main DPS character. I talked about how that can work with other teams, specifically Aggravate, but it also does work with this specific team because she's a catalyst. She can always allow for electro reactions, and also with the constant pyro you can get from these other party members, you're also creating overload consistently, which is helping Chevreuse trigger certain things with her overcharged ball, which is helping more, once again, allowing her to get her buffs out. So allowing Yae Miko to be on field for even this team as well as Aggravate can be extremely good. Now, once again, I do want to go back to that. I did talk about how she can be the on-fielder for one of these teams, but something like just throwing in some random characters that could be helpful even here could be something like this. Now you can switch out Kujo Sara with another character like Fischl if you so want to have kind of some extra off-field Electro, or you can switch her with Nahida, or you can switch her with another Electro or Dendro character. One of the two, doesn't matter, as long as they're a little bit more off-field while you want to keep Yae Miko on-field. It allows for a little bit more fun in the play. Once again, Yae Miko can go on-field or off-field, but I definitely have some fan favorites for specific teams. This is definitely one of my favorite teams. The Overload team I was talking about earlier is extremely good with Arlecchino. Once again, also another extremely good team that I've even seen as well is the Aggravate team with, or the Spread team with Yae Miko helping and supporting Alhaitham. So overall, Yae Miko has actually a lot of teams that she can use. A lot of the setups that you'll see Fischl play in is probably very similar to the setups that you'll see Yae Miko play in. The great thing about Yae Miko, though, is that she can be used in specifically Spread and Aggravate teams, which allows her and puts her a little bit over the top over Fischl in my personal opinion.
Shine down. Right here. Right now. Everybody stand! Torn to oblivion! Illusion shattered! Into the wind.
One with wind and cloud.
The wind knows. A sight to behold. Emerge, right here. I'm going in! Inazuma shines eternal! Shine down! Teamwork is great!
Fallen leaves, adorn my night.
Showdown. Emerge. Torn to oblivion! Right here. Going in! Drop your weapons! Overruled! Come on out, right now. Emerge. Nothing lasts forever. Right here, right now. Everybody stand back! Stop right there! You asked for it! This is where transfixed. Right here, emerge. I'm going in. Drop your weapons. Justice will prevail. Right here, emerge. Right now. Lay bare. Witness mine.
Well, that's everything I've got talking about Yae Miko. If you guys did enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Also, I'm looking forward to see how you guys actually play your Yae Miko. Once again, you saw a lot of people actually use Gilded Dreams. I personally go on the route of a different type of run with a different set on the 4-piece Gilded. So let me know how you guys run your Yae Miko and how you like it. Or if you guys are here to just say you love Fischl more, go ahead and say so in the comments. That's perfectly fine as well. Thank you again for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.